Welcome to the Mission Advancement Podcast, where we talk about the importance of human connection, generosity, and leadership so that mission-minded leaders will be inspired to learn and grow. Welcome to our episode today. I'm excited to have two guests, but very familiar faces to Mission Advancement. First, Schuyler. Hello.
Hi.
Also Lehman, yes, my husband, and founder of Mission Advancement.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. We're glad you're here. This is fun. And we are going to be having a conversation today with Steve Bult, our friend, our former client, and newly appointed president of Mission Advancement. So today is a fun conversation, a different conversation, a little more personal, I think, to us and to Mission Advancement than most of our other guests. But the timing here is exciting because we are entering a new season of the company. And Steve has his own leadership journey that we want to kind of hear more about today and let him share from kind of his perspective some of the values and things that have led him to where he is. So welcome, Steve.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
Good to be here. All right. Well, we're going to start with just your journey so that people understand. Today, you're the head of school at Wheaton Academy. You've been there a long time, but why don't you just talk a little bit about your professional journey that led you to your current role in the education space?
My journey really begins with a question of what do I want to do with my life in college? I think that's where many of us begin a professional journey and realized that I really enjoyed being around kids, started coaching, and actually worked at a Christian sports camp, summer camp, and realized I love being around kids, especially high school kids. So when I was graduating from college, applied for youth pastor jobs as well as teaching jobs, and ended up taking a teaching job in a high school, Christian high school in Southern California. It's a great place. I taught history, government, and coached baseball and basketball. Absolute blast. I loved it. I really wanted to find a way to make an imprint on the lives of young people, and teaching and coaching is just a perfect way to do that. I then took a teaching job at a school in the Chicago area. Again, teaching and coaching, but I had a mentor there who said, hey, I think you ought to take this role as an assistant principal. And with some trepidation, I did so. And he pulled a fast one on me. He retired about a year and a half later and said, I think you ought to become principal. And so at a pretty young age, I did that and absolutely loved it. Challenging role, but I was energized by it. And several years later, came to where I am now, Wheaton Academy, took over as principal there.
We don't want to get into the tactics of fundraising today. That's not necessarily our theme, but as you think about the journey that you went on through that campaign, in hindsight now, you can kind of look back on that experience, curious how it impacted you as a leader, the things that maybe shifted your thinking about your role, challenges you overcame during that season. So just give a little bit about how that journey was important to you in your leadership. Yeah,
I think it was humbling ultimately because, as a follower of Christ, knowing that He owns everything, and no matter what sort of strategy we employed, no matter what we did, there were great successes, but then there were these plateaus. And I think it was through those plateaus that I learned more and more. I'm not in control of everything. We can do best practice. We can set the table, but ultimately not having the control was a big deal. I think too, realizing that when people get excited about the mission, people get excited about what's going on, it's amazing what can happen. And sometimes it just takes the leadership of one or two people, and it can turn an entire organization. In this case, it was a couple of those people who got us off and running. And so really setting people up with a clear picture of what is the mission and how is what we're doing going to really advance our mission. And I think this is one thing that I relearned during that time. It was understanding that people don't just fall in love with a glitzy future. They need to understand why we can't stay here. I learned a long time before that if you want to move people from here to there, you can't just show them why there is going to be exceptional. You have to help them understand why our current situation is unsatisfactory. And I think as leaders, we often skip over that. We run to, here's why this is going to be a great future, but miss out on helping them understand why our current reality is simply unsatisfactory.
Yeah.
That was one of my biggest learnings.
That's great.
Yeah, I remember those plateaus as well. It's it's always challenging, I think, and I couldn't agree with you more about the things that we have control over, the things we don't have control over, and obviously prayer becomes an integral part of the process, and why we advocate that in our work today. When clearly you don't have control of something, right? You fall back to prayer, and prayer got us through, I know, a lot of those things, and because He is ultimately in control and we're not. I began to notice how you kind of dealt with those challenges and some of the adversity even that was going on at times just in the normal day-to-day running of the school. And that's when your leadership first began to kind of capture my attention. We didn't talk about it in those days. And it wasn't until sometime near the end of the campaign when you and I were taking a stroll around campus and we had an initial conversation. And that's when you expressed just some interest in possibly looking beyond, what it might be like to be a head of school and in another industry. When you were having that conversation with me, I was thinking something completely different than you were at that time. But you might just kind of share your perspective and what your thinking was at that time.
Yeah, so I remember that stroll, and I'm a teacher at heart. I if you ask my wife, if Steve gets excited about something, he's going to be an evangelist. He's going to tell everybody about it. And I got really excited about what I was learning and what I saw really worked about fundraising. And rubbing shoulders with a lot of my colleagues around the country, realized some of them had the same thoughts and fears, trepidation that I had. And I had already begun saying, hey, here's really some things that I've learned that have worked really well at Wheaton Academy. I think you ought to try it. And some of that was well received, and others was like, I'm not sure that really works to that degree. I know you're excited about it. I know you've had success. But I think what was developing inside of me was a desire to really see what happened at Wheaton Academy, see it happen in more and more schools, whether it was annual fundraising, whether it was campaigns. I saw that something could be employed well beyond Wheaton Academy, and I wanted to be a part of that in that area of fundraising specifically.
What you could never have known, of course, at that time was, Jennifer and I, for, probably 2 years leading up to that moment, had begun to think, and we've always, as we've, run the company, tried to think 5-10 years ahead and what will things be like down the road. So we had already had many conversations about what will things be like 5-10 years from now, and what do we need to do in order to get it there? And so we had already had conversations around the idea of finding someday a successor for both of us in our respective roles. And so that's where my head went immediately, because I had noticed your sort of, I'm going to take a stab at this, but your sort of compassionate, kind, yet assertive style of leadership that I had great respect for. I probably was remiss in complimenting you on that in those days, but it registered with me. And I remember getting back from that very trip where we took that stroll and sitting down with Jennifer and saying, I got a great idea because I just had a great conversation with Steve Bult. And she's like, okay, tell me about it. And so, and it's that conversation that led to you coming down and paying a visit to us.
Yeah, she said, who's that?
Yeah.
Who's that? Who's
I
that?
think I did. I knew who you were, but I really didn't know you at that time. I had not been part of that project. So for me, it was kind of okay, well, this is intriguing, but Schuyler's good at big, crazy ideas at times. And I was kind of the one going, let's just do a little, due diligence now and really see what this Steve Bult guy is all about.
Well, I remember a short conversation when I did come out here for a visit with you, and you said, we would like to talk about you being a part of mission advancement, but we'd really like to talk to you about stepping in a role of president and running the company. And, moving to Texas was not really on my wife and my card, as far as the future. And I didn't at that time blow you off, but I did go back to the hotel later that night, give my wife a call, and thought she'd say, you're absolutely crazy. We have family in different parts of the country. We're not going to Texas. But instead, she said, that sounds like a great adventure.
Full disclosure, I have seen the picture of you in a cowboy hat. So
hey,
yes.
I look pretty good. Yeah, right. But I was blown away, and I said, hey, who are you? What have you done with my wife? And she was open to it. And that really was the opening that I needed to allow the future to begin to unfold as it is.
Yeah. Well, I do want to talk a little bit about just beyond your head of school leadership. You've had some time now to think. This journey of transition has been a maybe unusually long transition. In your world of education, I've learned that you guys give a lot of notice. And
53 weeks, I think, yeah.
Which is wonderful on many fronts, I'm sure, but different than in a lot of other industries. So I guess the good news there is there's been a lot of time for processing and thinking and preparing, and that's been good for both of us, all of us, as we are excited for you to officially kind of step into the seat. But I'm curious kind of what's been going through your brain as you think about what it looks like to lead in a different type of organization, a different culture, similar in many ways, but we're a for-profit entity. That's a new type of structure, smaller team than what you've been used to. We're not educators, and in our own way, of course, we teach, but I'm sure there's been a lot of thinking over the last several months about what it looks like to lead. So I'd be curious for you to share a little bit about kind of what you're excited about, maybe what you're nervous about or scared about as you think about assuming this new role, not to mention relocating to the great state of Texas, by the way. Welcome. And we didn't say you're from Michigan. We probably should have said that early on, but you are a Michigander, right, through and through.
Correct.
But we welcome you to the Lone Star State. And tell us more about what you're looking forward to in the coming weeks.
I have transitioned before several times, and sometime following really great leaders, and this is no exception to that. And so there's always a bit of trepidation stepping in behind a beloved leader, or in this case, two beloved leaders. And so I think that is one thing that I think about right offhand. And I was recently reading a book on transitions, and I think it's so important to understand the organization and the people that are a part of it, how they might be feeling in a transition. And I talked to, I'm also vacating a role. So I'm seeing a transition in my current role. There's another head of school taking over. And I talked to one of our major donors about it when I let him know I was going to be coming to Mission Advancement and leaving Wheaton Academy. And he said, hey, listen, tell the person coming in for you, don't even change part parking spaces the first year. Just ask questions, be very visible, be understanding, and be understanding that people will experience a couple of things. Number one, they're going to have a level of comfort dislodged. And we all love comfort. And I'm seeing that both in the role I'm leaving, but also I'm guessing it's happening at Mission Advancement. There's a level of comfort with business as we know it, and there's a new person coming in. And I recognize that the newness of a leader like me also symbolizes the end of something in the eyes of people who are currently at Mission Advancement. So I think it really requires a sensitivity to people who are in their current roles and maybe grieving a loss of something. So I had the opportunity with our current leadership team at Wheaton Academy to get a glimpse of that. We were riding back from a leadership retreat, one of our last few retreats, setting up a meeting with our new head of school, and they were noticeably anxious about exactly what that meeting was going to look like, the details of it and the order of it. And I thought they were sweating the small stuff, but then I realized, just stepping back, they're really anxious. Their comfort is being dislodged. They're grieving a change. So I think when a transition arises, that's really important for the leader to understand. People are going to be somewhat unnerved. So to answer your question, I think that's one of the most significant things on my mind, that there are people who I need to spend quite a bit of time with just to understand exactly what they do in their roles, what they might be thinking they could be losing in the future. And yet Mission Advancement, I feel like we are poised as a company to really take off. The landscape of, I would just say, Christian education, but certainly not for profits in general, but Christian education's exploding around the country with school choice initiatives, and there are many schools that cannot hold all the people that want to be there. So schools are forced to build and thus forced to raise money. And so we have a great opportunity in the years ahead to really take off and to be a huge blessing to those organizations.
Yeah. Well, we're excited about it. I know the team's excited, but you're probably right. There's probably some anxiety and nerves. The good news is there's not a total loss, right? I want to be clear that I'm staying here and not exiting at this time. So I hope they feel a gain, more than a loss. But you're right, certainly a change and a shift. And I think there's going to be a time of earning trust. That's a big thing. I know with our team, when you're a small team, there's a sense of family at times. We know each other well and we like each other, and we all, there's not a lot of hierarchy in a small organization. So people are pretty honest, I think, and may come sit with you and ask you some tough questions. So I think you'll handle it great.
And back to the things that are out of our control, looking back on the way all this is started to play out and is playing out, I think in hindsight, I wouldn't do anything differently. In a perfect world, probably 6 months ago, we would have wished you could have joined us 6 months earlier. But understanding that exactly what you're describing is this time that's necessary for transition, both at Wheaton Academy, and by the way, we'd be remiss in saying we understand that Wheaton Academy is going through the same sort of challenges related to transition as we would be. But once Wheaton Academy named your successor, I know that was a huge relief on your shoulders, because they're suddenly less grieving your loss of you and more focusing on who's coming in to replace you. And your transition into Mission Advancement, as Jennifer just said, is not you replacing Jennifer, but joining her in leadership. And so there were obviously different stages over this time that clearly there needed to be time for them to happen. So, when it's all over, we may be able to write a great book about this, and as if we had anything to do with the perfect timing.
Right.
We weren't in charge of it, but God willing, it was the right timing.
Yeah, I remember when I transitioned into my role at Wheaton Academy, one of our alums, Wes Stafford, he's the former CEO of Compassion International. I'll never forget, he said, what's so important in any transition is the humility of the leader stepping in and the humility of the leader stepping into, say, a different role. So for the two of you, as you stay involved, you're stepping into different roles, and humility on your part, I've seen it, and that's why I've been very excited and comfortable in making this transition, but also humility on my part. And I've seen that not go well in transitions when maybe a former leader wants to have everybody remember they really did it better than anyone else could. And I've seen it with a new leader, make certain remarks to have all the attention on them and the changes that they were making. And man, it's so important to have humility on both the new person and the person who's currently there or maybe even moving on.
Yeah. Well, and that's a good segue to kind of close the episode with a little bit of just conversation about really what this podcast is intended to shine a light on, and it's leadership with the spirit of generosity, human connection, and just kind of a point of view that I think we are passionate about. I shared in our intro episode that, as a founder, there's a different kind of feeling being a leader because there's a sense that you didn't earn it. And there's a real imposter syndrome that comes with that. But I think all leaders struggle, whether they admit it or not, with feeling like they need to have it all figured out. And especially if you're sitting at the top of an org chart, but even if you're leading one person or a small department, there's a sense that because you're in that seat, like you should know the answers, you should make good decisions, and there's a reason that you've been sort of given that role, and part of that is a lot of decision making. But I know from sitting in the seat that couldn't be further from the truth. Learning is one of our core values at Mission Advancement. And a lot of that is, for me, candidly, in my seat. And transparency and honesty and all those things are values that I hold dear and that I really encourage, not only with our team, but with our clients and other peers that I have the opportunity to work with. So I'd love for you to share a little bit, and I'll ask you the pointed question to give you some direction, but courage is a big element, I think, of successful leaders, and we're often faced with a challenge or a tension or a decision that has to get made that requires some level of courage. And I'd love for you to share an example in recent months, maybe in your seat, of where that has come into play and a courageous decision maybe that you had to make that required some heavy lifting from you, maybe emotionally.
Well, I often think that in leadership, we are asked to solve problems that we did not create.
Correct.
And sometime, if you look at all of the options that you could take, there's no great option. So you have to really ask some important questions of yourself. And one of the questions that one of my former mentors used to ask is, what do we want to be blamed for? We're going to be blamed for something in this very challenging situation. What is the best thing to be blamed for? Or you could look at it differently and say, given the credit for, but in a sense, we'll be blamed for something. And recently, at Wheaton Academy, we had a situation that it involved everybody. It involved one of our employees, it involved a parent, it involved a donor, and it was a really complex situation. And there really needed to be some changes made, but not nearly to the extent that some people thought. And I actually had to take a really strong stance to make sure that I was blamed for doing what was right for our school community. And it was going to, in the eyes of some of our constituents, maybe not look so good. But I knew that at the core, we were making a decision that would preserve or enhance the mission. It would ultimately, for all those people looking on, it would cause them to blame us for exactly what we wanted to be blamed for. But it was a decision I needed to make that could cost us a lot of dollars, could cost us bad PR, and I really believe we made the right decision. But without going into all of the details, it does take a lot of courage to make a stand where there's no apparent great decision, really.
Right, yeah. That's good. What do you want to be blamed for? It's a good question to ask yourself. Yeah, Andy Stanley, I think, wrote a book or in a podcast I listened to. His question was, what's the story you want to tell?
Right, exactly.
And that's another way to frame that. Like, someday you're going to tell a story about how this went down or what you did in this situation, and what's that story that you want to tell? And that's another little nugget that I've tried to remember.
I think there's probably going to be a few more opportunities to make those decisions in the future.
Yeah.
There always are. And I'm just thinking back to some of the things that we've had to decide over the years, too. So thanks for sharing that. That's a great reminder to what goes into all of this.
Well, Steve, welcome. We're excited. We're not quite here, but you'll be here soon. Schuyler and I are just thrilled that it's come to, the point finally that we're able to begin, the next Mission Advancement 2.0 maybe. We're still here, we're not going anywhere, but it's a new day, and we're excited to add your leadership and skills and capacity to the team. So thanks for joining the episode today. Thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you both.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to the Mission Advancement Podcast. Make sure to like and subscribe on your favorite podcast app so you'll be notified of future episodes. You can also find out more info at missionadvancement.com or on social channels. Thanks again for listening.